Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. I think it's one of the best conferences I have been attending. It's also because interesting discussions and that our contributions will be published, which is very useful for our students and academia. And I am really delighted to hear many interesting and inspiring contributions. And I hope that my contribution will be inspiring for you as well, because I'm a political scientist. This is not an excuse, but just saying that maybe my attitude might be slightly different. I will talk about Ukraine and a little bit less about Moldova and Georgia, and changing perception in regard of integration process. And I was thinking about some theory, because we political scientists, we like theories and some approaches to apply. And one of the attitudes is called critical discursive analysis. You analyze the discourse and you are trying to explain effects and outcomes. And it was quite difficult. So I look at it from historical perspective to see various factors playing in history. And at the beginning, we can go into the Europe of early 90s. And now you can close your eyes and imagine how the Europe of early 90s was. You can walk through Berlaymont and meet Jacques Delors, ambitious president of European Commission at that time, who was trying together with Arthur Cockfield to finish single market, thinking about common currency, because one market needs one money. Maybe thinking about reform of common agricultural policy. There were countries, new countries knocking on the doors of European Union. Finland, Sweden, Austria, Norway. People, Germans in Berlin, that were shouting, "Wir sind ein Volk," because the reunification of Germany, which opened the door for deeper integration in tandem, François Mitterrand together with Helmut Kohl, who were bringing Europe close to Maastricht Treaty. Important change, because establishment of common foreign and security policy and cooperation in justice and home affairs. So this is one of the dynamics in Western Europe, but there was the another part of Europe, the Eastern. And this Eastern part of Europe was full of changes and instability caused by break of Soviet Union. So we can talk about some sort of Western core and post-communist transition at the Eastern periphery, with quite specific position of Central Europe, of course, which was surrounded in the East and South by instability. Because problems in Balkan appeared almost immediately, and there was uncertainty in Central Europe. What if the hostility will spread? Because peaceful future was not guaranteed. There were tensions in relations between Hungarians and Slovaks. There were tensions in between Czechs and Slovaks, leading to dissolution of common state in 1993. And it was natural to look at some stability and to look at the core, actually. But unfortunately, countries on the very periphery of Europe, like Ukraine, Moldova, or even Georgia, they had not such a positive view. In Ukraine, there was a huge problem because after a breakup of Soviet Union, a Soviet nuclear arsenal was left in Ukraine. I was searching for exact numbers, and there were around 600 warheads on missiles and more than 1,000 warheads in storage. It means that after Soviet Union and United States, suddenly Ukraine became third the biggest country with nuclear arsenal. There were many problems regarding unresolved status of Sevastopol and Russian Black Sea Fleet, because Russian submarines and vessels, they need some ports to be serviced and to operate. And of course, instability in Ukraine was cautiously observed by Soviet Union. There were some ideas if situation will went too far, possibly there will be some space for sort of intervention. Situation in Moldova was also critical. Soviets tried to make a coup in there, which failed. There were problems in Transnistria region, separatists backed by Russians. And similar territorial problems were also in Georgia, especially separatism in Abkhazia, in Ossetia, and Republic of Adjara on the borders with Turkey. Instability in Georgia resulted in short civil war, an unprecedented level of violence and criminality. So Georgia in 90s was very unstable. We can talk a lot about this instability linked to security problems. And a very important factor, of course, was Russian Federation, who tried to keep the empire as much as possible with different strategy. In Baltic states, for example, which regained independence, different strategy in cooperation with Ukraine or exerting influence on Georgia. But at the same time, in these countries, we had political leadership, having experience usually from former administrations of Soviet system, and they were able to catch the national line. And they had some vision about Europe, and one of them was Leonid Kravchuk in Ukraine, who had a goal or motto, Naša meta Evropa. It was about some idea or general policy orientation, which was also very familiar to us in Central Europe. For example, in the Czech Republic, we were talking about return to Europe, and it was sort of consensus in foreign policy. All Czech political parties, they supported idea of European integration, except communists, of course. But in this European periphery, it was more abstract goal, let's say. So elites were dreaming about Europe, but unfortunately, economic reality especially was not compatible with thinking about future EU membership. Just to demonstrate this, only in Kravchuk era, Ukraine lost approximately 40% of GDP because of disintegration of markets. And in 1993, the inflation rate was more than 10,000%. So you can imagine this instability, not talking about high unemployment, organized crime, systematic things like corruption, clientelism, and so on. These effects we can see even today, and they are playing important role in the accession process of Ukraine. But you can see that Ukraine enacted already that time some directions of foreign policy with focusing on Europe. So from early beginning, there was aspiration of Ukrainians to focus on Europe, and especially on NATO guarantees. Of course, Kravchuk signed Belaveža Accords, and they at least pretended that they are like interested in cooperation with Russia, but so far I know Ukraine never fully ratified accords, and in some aspects was hesitant, especially in cooperation with military or common currency, and especially Kuchma presidency was more successful in diplomatic efforts. On one side, Kuchma succeeded signing a treaty with Russian Federation, so-called big treaty about friendship with Russian Federation, important to clarify the status of Sevastopol and lending shipyards and properties to Russian Federation. But on the other side, Ukraine became a partner of NATO in Partnership for Peace. This was thanks to bilateral diplomacy, and Ukraine in this time established a very close political relationship, for example, with Czech Republic, Poland, Romania, and discussed many bilateral issues of let's say, very wide provenience. You can see also some statements of Kuchma, and again there is a very big focus on Western European integration. Early 90s are also time when the European Union started to formulate its attitudes and policies towards this area. So at the beginning there was Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, PCA, but unfortunately it was very technical in nature and not satisfying expectations of Ukrainians, especially when countries in Central Europe, they were openly thinking about accession, especially after Copenhagen summit, where criteria were set and these countries were preparing actually to follow this criteria. There were very high expectations of Ukrainian diplomacy from Helsinki summit. They expected that Ukraine will be invited to join European Union, but this did not happen. There was only appreciation and welcoming words of Ukrainian European choice, but without any concrete proposal, let's say. But few years after, let's say, negotiations about association agreement started. It was very long, very complicated process with many rounds of negotiations. And at the same time, European Union was thinking about new model of neighborhood policy. And the main dominant instrument was the Eastern Partnership, which was again another disappointment for Ukraine, because it was another initiative, not, let's say, proposing some concrete measures leading to membership in European Union. This Eastern Partnership maybe is the beginning of problems. It's in DNA of this partnership. As you know, it was created mainly as a Polish and Swedish initiative under the, let's say, skills of Radoslav Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, and Karl Bildt, who are very critical towards Russia. Russia was not partner of this Eastern Partnership, was not consulted in preparation of this, and that's why Russia had perspective that Eastern Partnership is another power tool of European Union aimed against Russia. because it's about spreading European influence into the close neighborhood of Russia. And at the same time, it was disappointing for Ukraine because it was another initiative without clear prospect of future membership. Association agreement was quite important, especially the economic part, later known as Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Area. This was quite very complex set of documents to be implemented for liberalization of trade and acceptance of European Union standards. Actually this become very solid foundation for faster integration of Ukraine in the future, and I believe also easier acceptance and implementation of acquis communautaire. You know what were the problems of association agreement and what was its fate. Once association agreement was finished, it was refused by Viktor Yanukovych, and then the set of events happened, including Euromaidan, annexation of Crimea, instability of Donbass, and other regions of Ukraine. So this association agreement caused unexpected effects in Ukraine, and the invasion of 24th of February is continuation of these events. But in many aspects, the full-scale invasion was change maker, and this was the decisive moment European Union, let's say, recognized the future of Ukraine in European Union. And here is a timeline to be considered. And I wish you put very close attention how fast the process happened. So 24th, we have invasion. 28th, Ukraine is delivering application to European Union. And at the same day, it's endorsed by 8 presidents, writing a supportive letter to European Council. 14 days after, European Council is inviting European Commission to issue its opinion on the application. And in 1 month after that, Ukraine is receiving the questionnaire about political and economic criteria. Within very short time, Ukraine is filling out this questionnaire about economic and political criteria. This is very interesting reading because you can learn a lot from it about Ukraine. For example, for me very surprising was that there is more than 6,000 state-owned enterprises in Ukraine of state property. But many, let's say, inherited problems from post-communist era. Never mind, the condition was met. The questionnaire was filled out and sent. So on 17 June, European Commission is ready to deliver its positive opinion. In this positive opinion, there was, let's say, light assessment of Copenhagen criteria, endorsing EU candidate status. When you will read this opinion, it's very interesting to follow the diplomatic language. Commission is claiming that Ukraine is well advanced, but on the other side, Moldova is only having solid foundations, and Georgia just has foundations. And this is, let's say, showing decently maybe the attitude of European Commission. declaring which country is most important and which is having priority and who is, let's say, second order country. And it's obvious that Georgia is far beyond Ukraine in its preparation, and so this is the difference. What is interesting, 23rd of June, just 6 days after European Parliament is approving with vast majority offering candidate status, and at the same day, European Council is approving it as well, just 2 hours after the vote of European Parliament. This is unprecedented, very fast process. I was trying to discover how it was in case of other countries, especially in the northern enlargement, Finland, Sweden, Austria, because these countries were very well prepared for EU membership economically. So there was no need for very long, wide negotiations, and everything was smooth because there was political priority as well. And it's well comparable, the timeline. But as you know, candidate status is only beginning, and negotiations may last very long. A good example is Turkey, of course. There are some factors behind this process very fast. Why this happened? I discovered, let's say, 3 important dimensions. First is geopolitical dimension. Case of Ukraine is very good to demonstrate, let's say, EU intention to play important role and have aspiration of global leader. Of course, European Union is trying to be global leader, and in economic area probably is one of the most important actors. But militarily or politically, European Union is still a dwarf, let's say. Not a giant, but a dwarf. This geopolitical background was highlighted by many key representatives of European Union, including Charles Michel, for example. There is important security aspect, of course. With its presence, European Union is trying to promote stability in the region, but it's questionable whether this is effective because European Union is perceived as a actor on the side of Ukraine, and sometimes for peaceful negotiations it might be a problem when actor who is trying to push for negotiations is on the side of one of the actors involved. And then it's moral symbolism, let's say, because people in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, they were supportive to European integration. And in Ukraine, it's very interesting because at the beginning, in 2013, only approximately 40% of the people were for future EU membership. But after annexation of Crimea, this percentage increased by 11%, and with the outbreak of war, it passed the threshold of 80%. So there is clear effect of war and instability on the membership support in Ukraine. To sum up, and some lessons learned from this process. I'm writing a chapter about it, so in my publication you can read many interesting details. But there are some implications of this trajectory to European Union. First, negotiations are at the beginning and they might last long. We know that negotiations were opened this summer, but so far there is no progress. But people and state administration in Ukraine is taking it seriously. They have sort of a roadmap, and they are trying to very quickly implement EU requirements. the question is whether implementation is really effective and not only on the paper, but this is another question for long discussion. But it might be expected that negotiations will be complicated and very long. Second implication is that Ukraine is quite weak in the terms of state administration, in the terms of capacity, and we have seen this in Western Balkan, because sometimes the driver for Europeanization is not the state itself, but it's European Commission putting pressure on these states, trying to increase and provide guidance and capacities. Third, of course, entry to European Union would require peace in Ukraine and stalemate, let's say, including possibly new security guarantees and maybe new security architecture in Europe. Because it's impossible to make enlargement with the country which is at war. Maybe there is also practical reason, but there are some legal reasons as well. Because in the treaties there are provisions very similar to Article 5 of Washington Treaty because of common defense policy. So if one country of European Union is under attack, other countries have obligation to help. And we see in European Union countries are having very, very diverse position to the war of Ukraine. If you compare, for example, Poland, which is like very supportive to Ukraine, and let's say more hesitant countries, especially for example in the West. Then, of course, the question is different development and fragility in all three countries. And there is a question how the post-war development in Ukraine will be. If Ukraine will, let's say, keep political consensus about EU membership, or there will be some critical voices. Because now Ukraine is united and people more or less support Zelensky. But once there is a ceasefire and peace, political consensus might be broken, because radicals, they will be always in favor for continuing the war and against the conditions of the ceasefire and peace, for example. So it might break consensus. Another problem are competing foreign policy orientations in Moldova or Georgia. There might be setbacks in these countries. For example, now we had elections in Georgia causing problems. A few years ago in Moldova we had pro-Russian president, and it was setback for relations with the European Union. So this might happen. And there are some implications in post-accession as well. What the membership of Ukraine would mean for European Union itself. The balance in the Council of Ministers, for example, it's necessary to prepare EU institutions for this new actor. Okay, this is it. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that I provoke at least some thinking about possible future and membership of Ukraine in the EU. Thank you very much.